Hello and Happy New Year. I'm Kim and this is Wild Hearts and Wildflowers. I haven't been on YouTube for three and a half weeks, but I decided it was time to get back to it because I've missed it. I have also decided that I do need a good 3 or 4 week break every holiday season each year. I have a gardening channel too that I've been doing about 4 years, and I've noticed the pattern of come early December, definitely mid-December, I don't burn out, but I get a little tired out. Mostly though, I just have so many other things that I want to do. I have a lot of kids and they all come back at Christmas time if they possibly can. And so we have a lot of festivities, and I also like to just relax quite a bit over the holiday season. I do a lot of baking, a lot of crafting, read a lot of Christmassy books usually, and definitely watch some Christmassy movies and just spend more family time playing games and such. I'm not really a wintry person as far as the colder weather and the gray skies go. Fortunately, I live somewhere that it's pretty mild in the winter, but I do miss the sunshine. Today is a gorgeous day. Third of the way through January, and it is in the mid 60s and sunny today, and I am really enjoying the break from the rain. So what have I got for you today? Well, it's a wrap up of my 2024 year of reading, and it was a good one. I had taken a step backwards from reading, a lifetime of avid reading, in the last couple of years as I was just really involved with my gardens and my orchards, but I had been missing my reading. So I got back to it this year and I really enjoyed it. There were some other milestones in 2024 as well. A huge one for me is that in May or June of 2024, I finished home educating all of my children. With 9 kids, that was many years, 33 years to be exact, of homeschooling K through 12. I won't count, helping here and there as they get going in college, but, hands-on, facilitating their education. It was fun. It was an adventure. It was great. And they all are independent, creative, kind, thinking adults, and that makes me very happy. And I will miss homeschooling in some ways, but really you grow out of it. As my kids aged through high school and into college, I developed, as we all do as parents, new relationships with them as they are now adults. And so, well, I'm looking forward someday to having grandchildren to help teach them how to read, because I will say, in all 33 years of homeschooling, if I had to pick a favorite thing, it was teaching them to read, and teaching them to not only read well, but teaching them to love reading. And the thing I am most happy with my kids, in addition to them being just wonderful people, is that they all love reading, because I know how important that can be in your life. And I know they have that, as well as each other, to fall back on through the years. Something else I really enjoyed doing this past year was getting back to language learning. I did study French in college for a few years, but I hadn't touched it in decades. And I got back to it this past year and just loved it. And also I started another language. I've had now a year of Indonesian, and that's been just a lot of fun, a little bit challenging, and good for the brain. Now, when it comes to reading, I didn't start the year off with any goals, except that I want to get back into reading just everything that catches my fancy. About halfway through the year, I noticed that I'd read over 50 books. So at that point, I said, well, okay, I guess I'll set a goal for 100 books just to make sure that I keep up with, my return to reading. Looking back over the year, I noticed that I did not have a very consistent pace. Some months I read a ton, and a couple of months I only read a few. But overall, I did hit that goal and read 106 books in 2024. In December, which I never did do a wrap-up on, I read 7 books. 2 of them were Christmas romantic bookish books, both by Jenny Colgan. One was The Christmas Bookshop, and the other, its sequel, Midnight at the Christmas Bookshop. I loved the first one. It was a great Christmas read. If you love books and you love getting away, it was set in, I have a horrible memory, Scotland or Ireland. I can't remember which. I'll put it up here. But it was really fun and very interesting. The second one was good too. Not quite as good as the first though, but if you're looking for something next Christmas, I'd highly recommend Jenny Colgan and The Christmas Bookshop. And then I also read The Phantom Coach, which is a collection of short stories, ghost short stories from the Victorian era, actually, edited by Michael Sims. And the first short story in that book was The Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell. And that was just the right touch of ghostly haunting for me. And I read probably 6 or 7 stories from that collection, and that was the right amount for me in Christmas, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm probably going to make that a little tradition for myself. And that was following along with Revenant Reads, who started this Victorian Ghosts at Christmas kind of read along this year, and definitely gonna do that again next year, I think. And then another read-along I did for Christmas was with Fiona from Reads and Eats and Sarah at the Bookish Knitter, who did a Christmas Sarah Morgan romance read-along. And I had never read Sarah Morgan. I'm actually not a romance reader. Really, the only romances I ever used to read were Regencies, and that's it. I mean, I like a little romance in some of my other fiction that I read, but not standalone romance. But these looked really cozy and fun, so I went ahead and read The Holiday Cottage by Sarah Morgan, and I really enjoyed it. I will say, though, something I learned looking back on 2024 and pushing myself to sample a few romances and taking part in other people's read-alongs is that, yeah, I'm definitely not a romance reader anymore. But there is an exception to that I'll mention in a minute. And then something else I read in December was the play, The Lion in Winter by James Goldman, and I loved it so much. I did teach drama for 10 years, so I have an affinity for plays anyway, and I am starting a, what I've nicknamed the British History Project, but it has another more precise name that I'll tell you about in another video when I do the video on my plans for 2025. But I've started that project, and I thought I'd kick it off in December by rereading this play, The Lion in Winter. And of course, it is all about Angevin, England, and Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, and their 3 kids, Richard the Lionhearted, and John and Geoffrey, and the messy, messy family that they had. One Christmas, just written so well, and the material that Goldman had to work with was, perfect for the type of writing he did. And set in 1183, it did a great job of summarizing what perhaps were their attitudes, their feelings, their thoughts about what was going on at that time. And if you're familiar with the story of history at that point, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're not, this is a great way to introduce yourself to it because it's a play. It's short and very readable and a lot of fun, as long as you're not expecting a very lovey-dovey, cozy Christmas family get-together. Also in December, I read When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. Now, I have to say I was a bit disappointed in this book. I had such high expectations, though. I had heard so many great things about it, and when I started the book, several months ago, actually, I did love it. I love the premise that one day in the past, several decades before, women, a lot of them, randomly and mysteriously turned into dragons and flew away. And now, a couple decades later, what are the after effects? And will it happen again? And how is it being hushed up? And what does it mean? And there was so much to explore in it. I thought it was going to be absolutely incredibly awesome. And it for me, it just really wasn't. It had many moments and there were parts of it I really did enjoy. But overall, I just expected a different kind of book, and it was a little too disconnected for me. I didn't really emotionally bond with any of the characters. I feel like it didn't focus enough on any one character for me to do that. But I am glad I read it, and I love the premise still. And the writing it was well done. It's just missing that emotional connection for me. Then the seventh and last book I read in December, before I stopped reading for the month, which was around December 15th, 16th, was A Holiday for Murder by Agatha Christie, sometimes called Hercule Poirot Receives a Corpse for Christmas. And of course, being the Agatha Christie murder mystery lover that I am, I really enjoyed that book. And the end of December brought me to the end of 2024 and 106 books. And now I thought I'd share with you a few special awards I've given to some of the books and series I read in 2024. First of all, what was the first book that I read in 2024? It was The Mimicking of Known Successes by Malka Older. I quickly read the sequel to it, and which was The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles, I believe. She has some really intriguing, intricate titles. And I'm looking forward to the third book in that series coming out this spring. I really like this. This was a science fiction, LGBTQIA plus friendly space opera mystery. And a blend of all those genres. It was really fun. And like I said, I'm looking forward to continuing with that series. Now, the last book I just mentioned to you was the Agatha Christie Holiday for Murder. In case you're curious, I'm getting these stats from StoryGraph. That's the only record keeping I do as far as books go. I did try Goodreads several times a few years ago, but it just wasn't a good fit for me. It was too overwhelming. I started StoryGraph this year though, and I love it. I keep it very simple. I don't mess with, what progress I'm making on a day-to-day basis. I don't mess with what format I'm using, so sometimes it lists the wrong format, but I get all the books in the right month, and that has been just a lot of fun to look back on. So StoryGraph tells me that the book I read of all 106, that is the book most popular on StoryGraph, all the other readers like this book the most of all the books that I read, is The Maid by Nita Prose. And I definitely loved this book as well as its sequel, The House Guest. Looking forward to the third book in that series coming out this spring. And the book I read this past year that was the least read by other StoryGraph readers was The Travels of Dr. Rebecca Harper, Volume 1. I'm sure Volume 2 was also the least read. This was a crazy series that I found so corny, but also I found compelling. Like I couldn't put it down, even though I realized it was very corny. It was a time travel book that went back into the Old West, but it didn't actually go back into the Old West. The woman, Dr. Rebecca Harper, who was a veterinarian, she actually went back into an old American Western TV show. It was never named, but it was very clear based on the way the characters were described that it was Bonanza, if you're familiar with that show. So yeah, I found it really corny, but I love time travel books and I love the Old West, so I actually enjoyed it. Now this award is for the 3 books that surprised me the most out of all the books I read. Now the first is actually not one book, it's a series, and that is the Lady Astronaut series by Mary Robinette Kowal. Why was this series such a surprise to me? Why did I love it so much? Well, because I didn't know it existed, and that totally surprised me because I love science fiction, and this one is all about science fiction and women empowerment. But another thing that totally surprised me about this series is the way the first book starts. So I don't like a lot of movies, but there are certain genres I do really enjoy, and one of them is the natural disaster movie. I do love post-apocalyptic, but any kind of natural disaster will do, Dante's Peak with the volcano exploding. I love a good meteorite. And well, the Lady Astronaut series starts off with a meteorite shockingly arriving on the Earth and destroying a good part of the United States. And this is in 1952, and it changes the course of history as we know it today, accelerating exponentially the space race and also accelerating to the nth degree climate change. And yeah, we have to get off the Earth sooner rather than later. So that beginning, not just the content, but the way it was written, it read like I was watching the best movie ever. And so she had me at that opening. And fortunately, I also love space exploration and space colonization and women empowerment and the politics that go into the space race the way it happened in this series. I loved all of it. So that was a very surprising find and a really looking forward to book number 4 that's coming out this spring, The Martian Contingency. And another very surprising book I read in 2024 goes back to what I said about definitely not a romance reader here, I realize, but I do acknowledge that now and then I will stumble across a romance that I actually love. And this was one of them, The Switch by Beth O'Leary. This was absolutely fantastic. Not really going to talk about it here. I'll link up above the video where I did go on about this if you want to hear a little synopsis. But if you like a good romance and you like a variety of ages in your books, this book might suit you very well. I really loved it. And since we're talking about the exceptions to the no romance reading for me, I'll tell you the other thing I figured out this year, and that's, well, I do still like Regency romances, but now they have to be a blend of genres. They can't be just strictly Regency romance. I find that really tedious now. But if they know the period and they include all those details, but then also write it as a mystery, that is very, very cool. And I've even found 2 series that blend the Regency period or a period on one side or the other of the Regency with not just mystery, but also time travel. And that's probably the most exciting thing I discovered about romance this past year. And then the most surprising book of all in 2024 for me, surprising in the sense that I was completely blown away by how much I really enjoyed it. And that was Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Q. Sutanto. And I can say that everyone I've recommended this book to has loved it. Even people who never read mysteries, let alone cozy mysteries. This one is just so good, and everyone comes away from it saying, I wish Vera Wong was in my life. I want a Vera Wong. And I do, for sure. StoryGraph tells me that the 3 genres I read the most in 2024 were, no surprise here, history, mystery, and science fiction. I intend to continue that trend in 2025, adding in a lot more nonfiction, especially nature books. Turns out I only had to DNF 1 book all year, and I think that that is a great stat. Now, the shortest book I read was 33 pages, and that was a short story, really, by Mary Robinette Kowal, and it is considered to be book 4.5, called The Lady Astronaut of Mars, and it shows us the main character of the Lady Astronaut series after book 4 that's coming out this coming spring. So in her old age and her last big adventure. And I totally enjoyed that short story. The longest book I read in 2024 was 775 pages, and it was book number 5 in a series I binged by Trinity Dunn, independently published. She's an excellent writer. And if you liked or loved the show Lost, all the seasons of it, well, you might just like this series. It's time travel. It involves an airplane crash. It involves magical realism and has lots of drama and romance. Definitely a captivating read, a page turner. Did it have areas that could be improved? Yes, it did. But I was there for it anyway because I just love that genre. Plus, it added in time travel where they went back to history. Like there was lots of different time travel. Yeah, hard to explain. Can't really, but very good. I read it all in digital format. I believe it's all on Kindle Unlimited, or it was when I read it. So you should check it out if you like that kind of thing. Had to shut my blinds. The sun was coming in so strongly. Not that I'm complaining. I have 3 awards left, and I consider these my top awards. So I've got my favorite new author, my favorite revisited authors, and my favorite book of 2024. So my favorite revisited author was Margaret Peterson Haddix. I read her when I was much younger, and she writes science fiction for middle grade and adults. I mean, the heroes, the protagonists are middle grade age, somewhere between 11 and 17 probably. But definitely, if you're an adult who likes great writing and great sci-fi plots, you'll love her work. I know I do. And I read several. I didn't count how many, but I probably read 5 or 6 or 7 of her books. Again, I did discover a new series by her that I didn't read when I was younger. She has a lot of books. So if you like that kind of book, middle grade, either sci-fi or sometimes just adventure with a twist, I guess you'd call it, that's really well written, you should definitely check out Margaret Peterson Haddix. Now, another revisited author who was an absolute favorite to reread yet again was Becky Chambers. I've read her Wayfarer series before, but I'm working my way through it again, and it's just as great this time. Cozy, sci-fi, found family, really explores some deep topics. And this year I also reread her duology, the Monk and Robot duology. So peaceful, so thoughtful, just love her work. And I found a new book of hers that I hadn't even read before. It was a novella. Talk about that in a minute. My favorite new author of the year was definitely Mary Robinette Kowal, who wrote the Lady Astronaut series. And I highly recommend that one to anyone who wants a great adventure, let alone if you love sci-fi. Biggest award of all, my favorite book of all 106 I read in 2024. We come back to Becky Chambers and the novella I'd never read before, To Be Taught If Fortunate. I absolutely loved this book, and even though I read it late in the year, I intend to read it again very soon. It was just that good. I only hope that somehow she can write some sort of sequel. It doesn't lend itself to an obvious sequel, but I think she can swing it. She's such a good writer. And this book, it was just so good. I'm not going to summarize it. I will link above the video where I talked about it if you want to see more specifics. So thanks for joining me as I reviewed what I read in 2024 and what I thought of it. And, a couple little lows, but mostly lots and lots of highs. I do appreciate you joining me here today, and let me know in the comments below, what were your favorite books in 2024? Did you find a new author you loved? Was there a book that surprised you the way several did me? My next video coming up is going to be my reading plans for 2025 and some plans I have for some very interesting, to me anyway, personal reading projects, as well as some group readings I'm going to be doing, a monthly reading or two like Foodie February, and my cat is enjoying climbing on the windowsill. Don't eat my tropical trees. Mitzi, what are you doing? I'll show you what she's doing. That's what she's doing. Mitzi. Mitzi, what? What? Are you going to eat my trees? Thank you. Cats, what can you do? Until next time, happy reading.